I've got 47 years of experience of farming the weather and working around the weather, but I've only probably got 5 years experience of farming the soil properly and understanding the soil. And conservation agriculture, the techniques are very different. We're working with nature rather than trying to force it with big tractors and high horsepower and harrows and making it all look brown. There's a winter pea here, for instance, which when we find, we should hope to see some of the really lovely root structure that these plants are creating for us. We've got the little worms, which are the worms that beaver away, turning the vegetation that sits on the top of the field after harvest. And then we've got some of the larger worms, and there's an example there, that are the deep burrowing ones, and they make these lovely holes, drainage holes in the soil, which means that rainfall percolates away really easily and really quickly, and it means that the conservation no-till farming style of farming is very resilient to the weather. The water drains away really quickly, and it doesn't run off the surface, taking nutrition away down the drains for us, and it means that it's the opportunities to plant when you want to plant are much greater, as well as the cost savings. And because we're not disturbing the soil and releasing that carbon back into the atmosphere, we're helping with the whole global warming thing going forward. There's another one there. It's just the number of worms is staggering, and we'll see the comparison in a moment. So while I'm not a livestock farmer and I don't actually have sheep, pigs or cattle on the farm, I am a livestock farmer because I've got a fantastic worm population. And this is my workforce. They work for me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're restructuring the soil. It means I don't need a huge tractor and lots of cultivation equipment, and they create an environment that lets a root structure go down in a soil that's very friable. It's got a nice open pore structure. There's been no compaction. It hasn't run together in a period of high rainfall like some soils can, and you can see there's been absolutely no impedance to how that plant grows. And as I said, this soil hasn't been tilled and disturbed any deeper than 1.5 inches, 2 inches deep for 5-6 years now, and it proves that actually you don't need to plough, you don't need to till to create an environment for plants to root freely in, because if you haven't destroyed the structure, and if you've got a worm population and a root population that's creating an open soil type and creating a nice soil structure for you, plants will grow really, really well, really happily, without having to do lots of mechanical work. So this is my neighbour's field. He's tolerant of me coming and having a dig and doing a comparison. With the high rainfall that we've had, and this is a barley crop that's been planted, that the soil surface has run together and it's sort of lost its structure. And so now if we get quite a high rainfall again, because the top is sealed, because there's no root structure from the cover crop and much less organic matter, that the rain isn't going to percolate into this soil very quickly, and anywhere there's a slight slope it will start to run off, so any herbicide or nutrition that's been applied to the surface is at risk of running into the watercourses. And when you go to dig, although it's been ploughed and tilled and cultivated, and in theory should have a loose structure to plant the next crop into, you can see that actually, and if we turn this round and the sun's a bit bright, you can see how solid this is and how the rainfall that we've had has run this together and effectively sealed it. And next door, in the cover crop, where every handful had an abundance of worms and fibrous roots and wormholes and open pores, of course this land that's been tilled is almost solid, and when that dries out it will effectively turn into a house brick, because it's very solid and there's no natural structure and no fibrous matter, keeping it open, and the water holding capability of it in a droughty spring will be very low, whereas the conservation ag soil with a high amount of organic matter and lots of fibrous roots, as I said, acts like a sponge and will hold moisture for a week, 10 days, 2 weeks more in a dry spring, and will enable the crop to have adequate moisture and grow much better for a longer period. As an example of the kind of tractor we have on the farm now compared to what we had before, this is quite a light four-wheel drive tractor. It happens to be 160 horsepower, but that's more than adequate for any task that we have on the farm now, probably apart from pulling a grain trailer, and that's the hardest work we have the tractors do these days. It sits on our John Deere direct drill, and we can see the coulters on this. This is a well-recognised direct drill. There's probably more John Deere coulters sold globally than any other drill style from any other manufacturer. And you can see that there's a gauge wheel that monitors the depth that you're putting your seed in, and a very sharp cutting disc. And this very sharp cutting disc will cut through our green vegetation of our cover or catch crops and cut just a narrow slit to put the seed in. So it's not disturbing the ground at all and stimulating more weeds to grow. There's a press wheel that will press the seed into the slot, and then there's a firming wheel that runs around and just closes the side of the slot. So you can plant a field with this drill, and when you look behind where it's been, you can hardly see that it's moved the surface. So it's key in not stimulating more weed growth. On average, these tractors now do about 150, 160 hours a year, and farming conventionally, we would put certainly 800 hours a year on a tractor, and sometimes 1,000 hours a year wouldn't be unusual. So these tractors are probably only doing through the year 20% of the work that they would have been doing before, and in some cases the size and the horsepower of them is half of what it would have been before. From stubble to stubble, so including planting our catch or cover crops, the whole establishment and looking after the crops through the year, including harvesting, we would now use a maximum of 41 litres a hectare, and in the past we would have been using certainly 2, possibly 3 times as much as that. And certainly work that I've done with a series of customers for a supply chain contract in the past, the range of fuel use ran from 40 litres a hectare to 160 litres a hectare in the extreme. So the potential is certainly to halve your fuel use, possibly more than that, and in the extreme, the fuel use would be around a quarter of what it could be on some soil types. There are 3 examples here of various seed mixes that I would use in catch or cover crops. 5 years ago, I didn't know what most of these seeds were. There's clearly a rye seed in here. There's an odd bean seed, and there's a sunflower. But there are also winter peas and vetch and buckwheat, and there's some phacelia and some clover and a whole host of other things. And there will be perhaps 8 or 10 different plant species seeds in each of these mixes, and that diversity is key to making your catch or cover crop work, because the different plants resulting from these seeds will be adding different things to the soil. We're standing in a field of winter wheat, so this is a cash crop on the farm that's going to be taken through to harvest and produce an income for me, which is really important. It was drilled with the John Deere direct drill, so the minimum tillage, minimum disturbance drill, and it was drilled into the last cash crop on this field was oilseed rape. It was harvested in July, and then a catch crop which was mustard based because it grows really quickly and is quite a cheap seed, was established on this field, and you can see the sort of height that it got to before it was desiccated with glyphosate, and the John Deere drill established the cash crop into it. And actually some of these, you will see that some of these pods, flowers set into pods, and there will be some seeds in some of these pods because they set viable seeds, and the various little birds will be able to graze on them through the winter and find a seed source, which is always very satisfactory. This field of oilseed rape has been established in a single operation behind the combine at harvest time, and has been planted with oilseed rape, but a whole range of companion plants as well, which are providing a diverse habitat and actually camouflaging the rape crop from cabbage stem flea beetle, which is a big problem with oilseed rape at the moment. And cabbage stem flea beetle, they only see in about 2 colours, and one of the colours they see is brassica. And so if this was a field of solely oilseed rape, that pest sees it as a food source and a home where it completes its life cycle and would target it. Because the oilseed rape, and you can see here, is growing in a camouflaged habitat, and in this case we've got spring beans here, which will be fixing nitrogen and providing soil structure improvements, as well as camouflaging the oilseed rape. We've got Phacelia, which is flowering nicely, and we've got some vetch as well in here, and vetch is another legume, and it will be fixing nitrogen as well as restructuring the soil and camouflaging the rape crop. So in amongst the companions, we've got some really healthy rape plants with very few, there's a few cabbage stem flea beetle larvae marks, but by and large that is a really healthy rape plant going into the winter, and it's received no fertiliser and importantly no insecticide to get it to that stage. So it's been really quite a eco-friendly, cheap rape crop to grow.
Yeah, I guess my route in is slightly different to most in that I started with machinery 7 years ago. I was looking for other things to do as part of my contracting business and ended up with a drill like the one behind me, slightly smaller one before it upgraded to this one. That got me out onto other farms that were going down the conservation agriculture route earlier, and it allowed me to go to 10 different farms and get different ideas of how to do things, and learn what worked, what didn't work. And then when I took the farm on here sort of 3 years ago, I've already got the machinery. It's kind of pointless to go out and invest in a load of cultivation equipment when I've got stuff for direct drilling. Rather than focusing all our efforts and what we learn from one farm here, I'm learning it from 10 different farms with 2 different drills. And then I can bring the benefits of it all back to here, and hopefully next year, instead of having 1 year's knowledge to go with it, I've got the equivalent of maybe 5 or 6, because everybody's doing something different and I'm learning from that. Right, so rather than reading books and that in my spare time, I seem to sit on a tractor and go and have a go somewhere else. I hope that if we get things right with this field now, we won't need to cultivate it or anything else. We'll just continue to, we'll direct drill this, and then we'll carry on direct drilling sort of subsequent crops, cover crops and everything in with that as we learn how to use them throughout the system as we go. This is the first year it's worked well. We've drilled them in the previous 2 years, August, September time, and it's just been too dry. They just haven't grown, and they haven't started growing until October when it's too late. These ones this year, they were established same time of year, but they hit the rainfall at the right time, and that's just meant that they've actually grown. We've had a lot more rainfall since. So at one point they were sort of this tall, and we thought, well, it looked like they weren't really going to grow and be very good, and within 4 weeks' time they'd sort of shot up to the levels they are now. So this is a tractor wheeling that we can see here. We've got wheat growing because we did actually manage to go up and down the field with the drill, and in the field it was fine, but it was the headlands that were the problem. So only did a small amount of drilling and decided to abandon it. So we hadn't sprayed the cover crop off because I didn't want to spray the cover crop off, find we couldn't drill it, and end up with nothing growing in the field potentially until March or April. So we'd have like any heavy rain or anything like that would be falling directly onto the soil over the sort of winter. Actually, by having a bit of patience and admitting that we weren't right on that day, we've learnt that we can't push it quite as much as I was hoping we perhaps could. different areas of this field would probably go differently, but we've got to treat the field as a whole. There's no point drilling half of it. So I think we've also learnt that keeping the cover crop green until we can drill it is a good thing in this situation, because it's still going to be here for the spring. The downside is that if we'd have drilled this well, left this, and then we'd had the wind and the rain that we had for 3 weeks, we'd have been in this situation with a good crop in the bottom and a cover crop on the top. I'm not doing it because I believe this is going to make me more money than another way of doing it. I'm doing it because I don't want to have to go out and buy lots of big cultivators and big horsepower tractors and have a massive great big diesel tank in the yard that I need to fill up every week. I want to be able to farm the area I'm farming better, be more weather resilient with less machinery, and every day that if I can turn up in this field, drill it, leave, come back 6 weeks later and drill my cash crop and go away again, all that time in the middle I can have off. I could either not be at work all the time every hour of the day on the tractor, or I can go and do some work somewhere else, either on another field on the farm, or farm a larger area myself, or for contracting customers. Part of the fun and excitement of the job now, and what makes it interesting, is that this is new. There's no one knows the answers to it yet. We can try different things, and probably a lot of the time they won't work, and we learn from that and we go forward. But it gives us all something different to talk about, rather than, oh, I saw 3 seagulls today and somebody else saw 5 or something. Well, if you're going up and down in the same field for 3 days, there's not a lot to talk about or see, whereas this is something different, and we've got a few different varieties and things, and we can learn something from that. I mean, at the end of the day, it's got to prove to be a better farming system. It's got to make money. It's got to be profitable. The gut feeling is that it's the way to go.
Back in 2012, we had a wettest summer for 100 years, and I was standing out in the middle of a lettuce field trying to plant lettuce, and it was wet weather, very, very difficult conditions. And I thought to myself, well, how are the next generation going to do this? Because ultimately, we need to set them up to succeed. And I thought, well, we've got to change here, and that's what sort of sparked me to go, right, we need to do something different. Ultimately, it's around building resilience in our ground and feeding the soil, keeping the soil living, to be able to then grow that crop. Conventional farming is a model or a way to produce food off the ground, and that is obviously very much based on artificial inputs, agrochemical. So moving to regenerative, which is moving away from conventional, what we call conventional farming, to regenerative farming, is finding that skill set to be able to help us develop and learn. Because we are getting to the stage now where we are having to learn around soil in areas that we've never really spoken about and got into. So this is what we call peat. So peat soil of a depth of about 600 to 700 mil. Some of our more deeper peat on the farm, and we would call this peat sort of lighter peat. It's not very, very black peat, as you can see, slightly stronger, bit more body to it, and this is where we grow our salad crops, salad and vegetable crops. Where we were ploughing everything in 4 years, we've reduced our ploughing by up to 60%, and that is growing. Okay, now what have we done there? So we're still using forms of aggressive tillage, so subsoiling, for example, but instead of then ploughing the land, we're using a cover crop to then break the land up, and then what we're doing is then minimizing our tillage on top in the spring. So for example, a maize crop will just drill directly in. If it's a spring cereal, we'll drill directly in. And then in the last year, what we've actually done with lettuce is we've been able to then come into a field like this here, we disc it, we power harrow it, and then we plant our lettuce. Okay, so we're only working very, very shallow. So it's a step change over a period of time, and it's completely changing a production system that we've all trained in for the last however many years. We have a complete team trained in it, and there's not the technology out there actually yet, slowly coming in. Okay, but one of the big things that we are adopting is strip tillage. Okay, so if we take a field like this, for example, we would then, for salads and veg, is we would just go straight in, and all it would do is cultivate a little strip where the plant or the seed would be placed. So overall, I think the thing is when we talk around sustainable agriculture here in the Cambridgeshire Fen, our big focus for the last 4 years has been very much around rotation, crop diversity, cover cropping. Where can we get cover crops in? Keeping our land covered, not necessarily alive, but keeping our land covered, but the alive aspect of living root is next, and really driving the minimum tillage. So I would say we have in the region of getting on for probably 1,000 acres across the whole farming area, which is in some form of habitat. So that's creation of flower meadows, wild bird mixes, and also wetlands. So we've basically turned a little corner of our farm back into a reed bed. Our hare numbers have exploded. Our farmland bird diversity, so we did a count back in 2014. I think we counted 3 different species. Our last year, our big farmland bird count with the GWCT, we had about 8 different species. So in a few years, very quickly, and a lot of it is not necessarily nesting habitat, because obviously they've got a large area to go. It's more around the food, and so the insects through the nesting period, so the protein aspect, and then the seeds over winter. Water is, as you can imagine, for salad and vegetable crops, water demand for the crops, especially through that peak growing period, is massive. So what we've done is over times we've gone from sprinklers or flood irrigation in some aspects to then gun and then boom and then more recently boom. But in the recent 3 years we've driven drip irrigation. Okay, so we're placing the water in the root zone, and we can place the water at any point of the day depending on the conditions. We're working to an average of about 30% water saving from drip irrigation. And then on top of that, so we've done a lot of work in digging out and lowering the water table across the farm, so we can get a consistent water table across the farm and give us more capacity in our dike systems to move water to where we need. And then what we've done in the last 20 years is actually created about 650 million gallons of reservoir storage space that we have across the different farming sites, and then we can use these drains and dikes to be able to move the water across the farm. All we've really done is learnt a production system, what we call conventional farming. So it's based around fertiliser application and agrochemical and heavy tillage, where we need to then start to learn about regenerative. It's the belief to start with that it's the right thing. Drive a culture, shift change, and see the value in it. And we absolutely see the value in standing in a field, as you can see here, green cover. This will be grazed off by sheep, so we've got diversity in that aspect, and we are keeping our soil alive and keeping it going.
We were just having a conversation about whether that was wild carrot, and I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah, so it says it's from the carrot family. So we're just talking about how it's quite hard to actually, as a farmer, this is kind of all quite new, and some of these species we're not experts on. We know, our wheat and our barley and things like that. But somebody told me the other day about this app on your phone called Seek, and you can take a picture of different species and it will tell you exactly what it is. So that's really handy, and if we can start to log that, then we can have a log of everything that's on the farm, which would be fantastic. If we dig down here, and we can see, Phacelia roots are not particularly deep rooting. That's just creating, drainage pathways and also lots of food for worms and things. It's actually still quite dry underneath here. You can see the kind of massive roots there that's come. And if we didn't have that cover crop in there, it'd be quite stale, quite sodden ground now from all the rain we've had. That's a bit of the buckwheat there that's died off because of the frost. So this is kind of a medium loam soil, quite sandy, so it's actually quite light, free draining soil, but the cover crop's definitely aiding that. If we went and dug some out there where there's not the cover crop on it, it would be much wetter than this, and you see how it just crumbles up. So that's a great seed bed for us to drill our following crop into. This is coming into a crop of peas, and they like kind of nice free draining soil to get established in. They don't like sitting in wet, cold soil. So this is part of our agri-environment countryside stewardship, one of our options. So this is taking some land out of food production. This is a winter bird food for all, a range of different songbirds. So we've got about 5 hectares of this around the farm. And it's a mixture of various different things. I think there's quinoa in here. Some of this is kale, which there's not a lot of seed on that at the moment, but that's a 2-year mix, so that will actually stay in here for 2 years and then shoot up and produce a lot more seeds next year. There's millet in here, a whole range of other things, which, you know, I can't name them all, and that's why it's also quite important to get some advice on what we plant. But yeah, the idea is that by taking these areas out of production, it's a great habitat for, you know, a whole range of farmland birds, and the feed value in this is massive. And then this definitely feels like the right thing to do. And we've had a discussion about, you know, the cost benefit of stewardship as opposed to cropping the land, and it is quite marginal at the moment. You know, these things, especially in small plots, actually take quite a lot of management time to do. But I've done it, and I'm keen to do it. It feels like the right thing to do, and hopefully it's the right thing to do for the environment, but also for our crops growing in the fields as well. Trying to get both the farming and the environment schemes working together for the benefit of everybody, which I think is possible. It's just there's a lot we've got to learn.
I'm Martin Lyons, an arable farmer in Cambridgeshire. I'm a third generation farmer. My grandparents came in 1936. Farming's seen huge changes in that time. We've been incentivised to increase production, take away hedgerows, environmental features, and make the farming bigger operation. We're 165 hectares here. We also rent and contract farm, taking the operation up to 550 hectares. Year 2000, I really started to think about how our farming operation is affecting the landscape. I'd been to college and university and come back into the business and was expected to take on what we've got and to farm in the way that was farmed before. And I questioned much of what we're doing. I questioned why were we doing things. So I could sell it to my father, who thought very differently. He was very much farm as much as we can, put loads of product on and increase production. And I'm trying to find a balance, and sold the idea that public will give us some money to put more hedgerows in, to put those buffer strips, those areas where we shouldn't be putting spray products. And it got him to accept that journey, that we need to do something different. And as we carried on going, I realised much of what we're doing in our soil movement with our big ploughs and the bigger and bigger tractors is actually destroying our soil health. Our fields were getting wetter, harder to move. And then one day I suddenly realised the damage we caused within the soil profile of when we were ploughing. So that really engaged me to think about what's under our feet. One of my neighbours put a large free-range chicken farm in, so we actually managed to capture all the muck coming off the chickens to fertilise our crops. We've actually removed all artificial phosphates, potash, 30% of our nitrogen need by increasing the muck level, which is also increasing the organic soil level. But we only need 6 to 8 tonne a hectare of chicken muck. They are producing far more than I need now. Much of our farming system, we've always concentrated on what's above ground and in producing the crop, not improving the soil health. By welcoming livestock back in and using manures, it's actually focusing on waking the soil up to make our crops grow stronger and better in the future. Before we farmed in this kind of system, these fields would have been left bare. We'd have cultivated them after the harvest, used 100 plus litres of diesel per hectare. We now only use about 40 litres of diesel per hectare of getting this established in my cropping system. But to actually see livestock back in, and I think it makes the countryside look a far better place. These aren't my sheep, they belong to somebody else. So he has an income generation from my soil as well. So he's paying me some rent. So it's about having more opportunities for more farming businesses to get an income generation from this landscape. So I hope to achieve about half of the cover crop that's here, maybe a little bit more. If the weather's kind, they can stay here for several weeks. If, like now, we've had some really wet periods, they may have to move off and come back later. Because what I don't want to do is destroy the soil health and poach the ground up. And sheep are very kind to the ground. They're called a golden hoof. They're very light. But too much will deteriorate. So it's about having them moving about. Like years ago, there was like mob grazing with livestock that were actually, native breeds used to come along, munch and move on. And we want to recreate that system of come along, eat a bit, move on. So no piece of ground is over munched or trod. So in this field, we've actually started putting strips 6 metres wide across the middle of the field, and they're actually every 4th tram line, and they're actually to deliver biodiversity out to the middle of the field. We've got lots of habitat around the outside, but what we're really finding is, beside those habitat margins, particularly the pollinating elements, we're seeing yield benefits beside there. So if I can get that pollinator and predatory insect across the middle of my fields, they can travel out and eat my pests. They can pollinate better across the field. Earlier on this year we planted this, we'll crop either side, and these will stay here permanently for the next several years. And actually what we could do in a few years' time, if the policy allows, we can actually put some trees along here and have fruit trees growing in the fields as well. So it gives us huge opportunity. As the aphid numbers come up, the predators will come out of these margins and straight into the field. Without these, the aphid numbers will go up, and we've got to get the predatory insects to come from the far end of the field to come and munch them. And for me, it's about having this balance. And as a farmer, I don't want to use insecticides. I'm trying to deliver habitat that will do that pest management tool for me. The more regenerative I get and think of soil health and system approach rather than a product approach, my herbicide bill's gone down by half, my fungicide bill's gone down by 40%, my fertiliser bill is either cut by half, and I want to get away from using artificial nitrogen in a few years by having a systems approach, building on soil health benefits, building fertility and natural processes within my farming system. So I think the future's got to be that way, because artificial fertiliser is going to be a limited resource. Diesel will be a limited resource. We will move away from these fossil-based products to more nature-based products. We cannot continue mining phosphates and potash out of the ground. It's not renewable. So how the heck do we find a farming system that actually allows us to produce enough food to feed the global population, but also have enough effect and benefit to the soil and the system around it, and without costing my business too much money? Because people's food choices and where they get their food from and where that food is produced to the effect we have on our environment, our climate and nature. And we need to connect people with those positive food choices. And it's not about eating more greens or having a vegetarian diet. Have a diet choice of whatever you choose. That's for you to choose. But understand where that food comes from. If you choose to eat meat, make sure it comes from a farming system that you understand where it's produced, how it's cared for, and take ownership of your food choices. If you lived in a town or in a house, you have your bird table in your back garden and you get the joy from that. I have a lot larger bird table, and I feed that. We're actually putting over 250 kilos a week of seed out to feed the wildlife we have around. And actually it's a real pleasure to go and enjoy it and just think about it. At the bottom end there, I actually put a bench down so I can actually take my dog for a walk. If I'm a walk in the afternoon, just sit down and enjoy. The mindset of most farmers, it was producing grain or producing livestock, and that's where we got our income from, plus government support. The future is very different to that, and we've got to bring in different revenue streams. But we've got to understand how nature is a stakeholder in our business. How nature, we can work with nature to add value to our business through the income streams, but also improving productivity by having improved soil health. So it's how do we join the two together and shift this stuff in here, because out there it works. It's a farmer's mentality that stops making it work quite often.